Friends, welcome to my channel. Before listening to this story, I will ask you to like and subscribe. It's not difficult for you, but it's nice for me, and we're starting. I was in my home office filling out an invoice for one of my clients when I heard the front door open. I usually call out to my wife Kristen to say hello and let her know that I'm home. I was delayed because I was halfway down the page entering itemized expenses and didn't want to lose my place. This delay has served me well. "Hey, girl, Jerry's not home, is he?" I heard. I recognized the voice. It was Sandra, our neighbor and one of Kristen's closest friends. She must have seen that Kristen had returned home, and she came. "No, his car is not in the driveway or in the garage. He said he had something to do today." "What happened?" my wife replied, walking into the kitchen. "I heard the refrigerator door open. I was at home without a car just because it was under repair. The dealership gave me a ride home as it was closer than my usual office. I often worked from home, so it was just as good for me to work here as in an office in the city center." "Great, do you want to have fun today?" Sandra asked. "This has now received my full attention. I completely forgot about that bill." Reaching for my phone, I started recording the conversation. Kristen giggled. "I would love to, but it's too hasty. I'm not sure I can get away." Jerry said something about us going out to dinner. I decided to relax and have a glass or two of wine. "Do you want to?" My home office was a converted room next to the kitchen. I turned off the desk lamp and turned off the computer monitor. The door was slightly ajar, and I didn't want one of the women to realize that I was eavesdropping. I heard the clink of glasses. They were too busy getting out their wine glasses to hear me. "Oh, come on, help the girl. Tammy was supposed to be my girlfriend today, but her mom called. She got sick with some kind of stomach ailment, so Tammy had to go to her and help," Sandra said. We had a double date with Eric and Rich. Tammy was the third member of the trio. They started calling themselves the Three Amigos back in college. Sandra and Kristen went to the same high school. Tammy joined them in her freshman year of college. They shared a room most of the time in college. I always suspected that they shared more than just an apartment. I met Kristen during college, and we started dating in our senior year. So I knew both Tammy and Sandra well. Both women possessed the love drive and moral qualities of minks. If they liked the guy even a little, they would spread their legs on the first date. They both offered me a try several times. I refused because I was with Kristen. Kristen was much more reserved, the most cautious of the group. By no means a prude, but also not a cheater. At least that's the impression I got while we were dating and continued throughout the 7 years of our marriage. Admittedly, before we met, she was quite active in love, but after that, she was always faithful to me. In all the time we've been together, I've had no reason to doubt her. Until this moment. After hearing this conversation, I realized that my trust in my wife's fidelity was completely misplaced. Sandra was in her third marriage. Neither she nor her first two husbands could resist fornication. This, of course, also applied to her first husband. He would use any girl who stood still for a long time. The second husband started an affair after he caught Sandra with a work colleague. I thought it was justified because he had already filed for divorce. Of course, Sandra claimed it was cheating. According to her twisted logic, she could do whatever she wanted, but her husband had to be faithful. I liked her current husband. He worked for the same company as me. As a service representative, he had to go out of town a couple of times a month. He was a hard-working employee and a friend. He met Sandra at a party when I invited him to my house. He and Sandra had been married for a little less than 2 years. As soon as the house on the next street was vacant, they bought it. Tammy never got married. She was engaged several times, but she was a coward each time. I suspected that she needed her freedom more than her husband. She joked that diversity is the spice of life. "Oh, you dog. You know how much I want to go with you and make good love to you. But I love Jerry," Kristen said. "I don't want to spoil what I have with him." "So what? Just because you love him doesn't mean you don't deserve to have some fun," Sandra said. "These guys are just relieving stress. They certainly don't pretend to be anything long-term. Just toys." "I take it Bob's out of town?" Kristen asked. Sandra replied that yes, until tomorrow, so she wanted to go get some today. You mean get a lot," Kristen giggled. "Both of these guys are suspended like horses. I bet they take Viagra every time they have a date. No man I know can hold on as long as they do after they finish a case. And they can use you for a long time. You know, that son of a bitch Eric shoved that thing up my ass the last time I was at his place. He didn't stop using me. I suffered for several days and was afraid to go to the toilet." "Oh yes, it was so funny," Sandra said, laughing. You screamed like a pig when he did it. He slapped your ass like he was riding a bronc, rodeo half-wild horse. You angered him by saying that you would not let him love you anymore, and a little later you stood bent over and begged him to give you some more affection and love. Admit it, you're as big a cheater as I am. So why do you need me today? You can handle both guys. I know that you've pulled trains before and didn't show it, Kristen asked. You know these guys have a thing about sticking it in the same hole his buddy just used. Even when all three of us use them in the same room, they still refuse to change partners. We've all made love to each of these guys, but we've never made love to two guys in one night. Brian won't be home today. If you don't go, I'll have to choose either Eric or Richard, and whoever stays will be furious. Damn it, girl, our conversation is turning me on more and more. Kristen giggled. I should have knocked you to the floor. I want to be loved again today. I need to show myself in all the positive qualities, and these guys will do it. My problem is to escape, Kristen said. I usually just go with you and Tammy when Jerry goes to fish camp. He thinks I don't like sitting there in the swamp, and sometimes I like it. And I'm probably going to have to give up these toy boys soon. We're talking about having a baby. None of these guys look like Bob enough for me to risk letting them get me pregnant. And they refuse condoms. Okay, how about this? You're going to tell Jerry that Tammy just broke up with her last boyfriend, which is true, by the way. She's worried about it, so we have to go to her and comfort her. Maybe have a drink of wine and just have a bachelorette party. It will also give you an excuse to stay up late or not even come home until morning. We'll take my car and say we're too drunk to go home. Tammy will support us. You're going to pick out a hot little dress, pick up your use-me heels, and take this to my house before Jerry gets home. Then you'll come out of here in your usual casual clothes and change at my place. Jerry is sitting here and doesn't suspect anything. I know. And to really get him started, I'll be here. I will thank him for being so attentive to our friend and hug him tightly. I'll rub my chest against his chest and maybe slip him a little tongue. Leave my husband alone, you cheater, Kristen laughed. You're supposed to be a happily married woman now, remember? Besides, I don't want to share it with Jerry. Sandra giggled. You share all three of your holes with other men, but you don't want to share your man, right? No, was the answer. I wouldn't want to share Bob either. I'm woman enough to give him everything he'll ever need. And there's still some left for my boys. Then let's pack up your clothes and stuff and take them to my house before Jerry gets back. Otherwise, we're screwed. More precisely, we are not going to get anything. I waited, sitting in the darkness of my office and thinking about what I had just heard. My supposedly faithful wife cheated on me with at least these three guys and two of her girlfriends. Who knows how many more came before them? I waited until they came back from the bedroom. Let me look outside first to make sure Jerry's not driving up, Sandra said. Okay, the coast is clear. Let's get our asses out. I heard the front door open and close. I went to the back door and walked around the house. I watched Kristen and Sandra turn right to her house, 2 houses down the street. As soon as they were out of sight, I turned left at a brisk pace. Before I reached the next block, I was already dialing my brother's number. My stomach was churning with anger. Yes, half an hour ago I loved Kristen with all my heart. We even talked about starting a family. What I heard turned my feelings upside down and filled me with rage. I started imagining several scenarios, from chasing her and shooting the bastard she was cheating with, to using one of those telescopic batons and breaking several bones. In both cases, I would have been arrested. I dialed the number and called my brother. Oh shit, man, Jason stated when I explained the situation to him. I didn't know they were doing this kind of thing. Tammy is a real hot cheater. You know that I made love to her several times before I met Sue. Tammy is a hot fool, but not suitable for marriage. I kept wondering who else she could be. Sandra was also a joker. I thought she might be a wild fool, but not someone for any relationship. So what are you going to do? Jason has known girls almost as long as I have. I asked him to pick me up. When he picked me up 20 minutes later, the dealership called and said that the car was ready. I asked him to take me there. Let's go to the grill and have a beer. A few guys will meet us there, Jason said when I went outside after paying the bill. I wasn't thirsty, but Jason told me to get strong and be there. I'll take care of you. I followed his advice. I knew both the guys who were waiting for us. They were mutual friends of my brother and me. They would have covered for me. One of them went through a divorce a few years ago. He told me how bad it was, but then he laughed and repeated an old joke about why divorces are so expensive. They're worth it. I told all three of them that I don't really lose that much in a divorce. We bought the house only 3 years ago, so we had almost no equity. I was focused on paying off the college loan as quickly as possible, so we only had a few thousand in savings and accounts. Kristen earned almost as much as I did as a consultant, selling medical supplies. Alimony was not a problem, and neither were the children. I wanted revenge, scorched earth. I wanted to figure out these bastards and hurt them as much as possible. I had no idea who they were. After outlining my goals, the three men began to grin. "We can do this," Don said. "We're going to a bar or wherever they're going. I'll keep an eye on the bastards and get their license plates. You know my brother is a policeman. I can find out who they are." "Do you happen to have a Find Phone app on her cell phone?" Ed asked. I nodded. Kristen was always leaving her phone somewhere. Usually all I had to do was call him and hear his call. But sometimes he ended up in her car. For someone who needed him so badly for work, Kristen was very careless. Without thinking twice, I decided to wait and see if I could get information from her phone. But I got the impression that these contacts were planned by Tammy and Sandra. Kristen joined them as another pair of holes ready to be loved. "Damn it, man," Don said, chuckling at my statement. "You don't give your wife any indulgence." "My future cheating ex-wife," I corrected him. "Jason and Ed called their wives and said they needed to help a friend tonight and they would explain everything later." Don was still single. He was still too scared to have a steady girlfriend. "How big are these guys if it comes to that?" "I just want to know if I need to have a telescopic baton handy." I told him I had a baton and I would carry it with me, but I wasn't going to stand there long enough to get into trouble. I was going to tell them they'd been caught, take some pictures, and get out of the Dodge. If Don can follow the guys and get their numbers, that'll be enough for us. Yes, a fight can spoil today's mood, and a shootout would have been even worse. I knew that Ed shared the same philosophy as Jason, Don, and me. Never get into trouble and leave if you can. But before you let yourself get your ass kicked, you're going to blow up another bastard. "Hey dude, do you mind if I check in on Kristen later?" Ed asked, grinning. "As far as I understand, you won't have to wait. I've already finished with her. Although you might have to borrow her boyfriend's sloppy seconds today." I grinned back. "The only thing is, no matter how good she is, I'm not sure she's worth being your last love session." Don and Jason laughed. Their jokes made me feel a little better. Leaving all three of them to prepare for the evening, I went home. I hadn't even reached home when the phone rang. It was Christine. "Hi, baby," she began cheerfully. "Look, I know we talked about going to dinner tonight, but something came up." "Yeah, a fool like your boyfriend. Tammy's all upset. It seems she broke up with her last boyfriend and she needs to talk it out," Kristen began. I asked her if he had caught her with another guy. She stopped in surprise. I do not know why. She's just very upset. She thought this guy might be the one." I laughed at that. I couldn't help myself. "Seriously, she's upset. Sandra and I are going to go to her house and sit with her. Maybe we'll have a bottle or two of wine, whatever it takes. We just want her to know that we care about her. You don't have a problem with that, do you?" "I would never have a problem with someone taking care of a friend who needs it," I said. "It is difficult to build strong relationships. You know, the kind where there's someone you trust who knows he's got your back and is always looking out for you." Kristen seemed to pause. Or was it my imagination? "Thanks, honey. I'll be out in a few minutes." I told her that I would be home in a few minutes. She was still there when I arrived. "Aren't you going to take your bag with you in case you stay?" I asked when I got home and saw her with only her purse. "For example, will you and Sandra drink too much to drive safely?" She stuttered and said she had a toothbrush in her purse. "Yes, I think if it's just you three women there, then you can sleep naked," I laughed. She blushed beautifully. She walked out the door. I hurried to my room to take off my suit and change into jeans and a shirt that would be suitable for going to the bar. I needed a shirt that I could put on, because I had attached the gun to the waistband of my trousers on my right side. I put my telescopic baton in my right back pocket and my wallet in my left. I hoped I wouldn't have to use either weapon, but if it came to that, I'd rather hurt someone than hurt myself. An arrest would have been inevitable anyway. I called my brother Jason. He hurried home himself as soon as we left the bar. He swapped cars with Don so he wouldn't be recognized. I went out the front door and turned left again. Jason picked me up. We drove a block and stood on the street where we could watch Sandra's house. We hoped they hadn't left yet, but to be honest, we thought it would take time for the women to pack up. After an hour of sitting, we both became bored and dreary. According to the Find Phone app, Sandy still had it, but I wondered if she'd forgotten it. I decided to call Kristen. "Hey," I said when she answered. "How's Tammy doing?" She faltered. I didn't give her time to think. "Put her on the phone and let me talk to her. I'll cheer her up a little. Maybe I'll introduce her to one of the guys in the office. I was helping Sandra. She and Bob look quite happy." "We're not there yet," Kristen replied. "Sandra and I are still at her house. I asked her why they took so long to leave. Sandra needed to make some calls first, and we wanted to talk a little before we went to Tammy's," Kristen replied calmly. "We'll be leaving here soon. Are you still at home or have you already gone out to eat? I'm sorry I didn't have time to cook something for you." "No. Jason picked me up and picked me up. We're going to have a bite to eat and maybe have a couple of drinks, since you'll be late if you come home at all tonight." There was relief in her voice, and she told us to drive calmly. I suspected that she was afraid that I would walk to Sandra's. It would be very difficult for them to explain why they were half-dressed or completely made up, with slutty makeup, perfume, or in beautiful underwear. If I'd been standing at the door, they wouldn't have been able to change quickly enough to avoid being caught. I hung up the phone. Jason was grinning. "It's fun making love to them, isn't it?" Then he got sad. Of course, it's a pity that it came to this. I nodded, but said that at least now I know, so I can cut my losses and move on. "So there's no way you're going to try to settle this case, even if we lose them tonight and can't prove they're cheating?" I shook my head and said that the conversation I had overheard earlier was enough for me. 20 minutes later, Sandra's garage door opened and she pulled out. We followed her easily. The women did not suspect that they could be followed, and therefore probably did not look around. Most likely they were discussing how they would be fucked and started their engines. I bet they wouldn't even spend a lot of time drinking. They didn't need to seduce anyone or even play seduction. Their goal was to make love as much as possible. I called Don and Ed to keep them informed. They were already on their way. Sandra pulled into the parking lot of a rather quiet bar that we all knew, a quiet place known as a pickup bar. There wasn't much music, but mostly you were sitting, drinking, and talking. They decided whether the person they were talking to was someone worth getting to know. If not, then we went home or waited for the next one. No one took a second look at anyone, unless they were considering a future date. "Damn it, Kristen looks hot! And Sandra too," Jason remarked, watching as he and Sandra got out of the car. From our position, we could see both women adjusting their tight dresses. The dresses are maybe a couple of inches below their pussies, but no more. "I wonder if they wear bras." I shook my head. I knew Kristen wasn't wearing it. She couldn't wear it with a dress like that. "I bet they're not wearing panties either, unless it's a thong," I said roughly. "And then it would be easy to put on a short show for your toy boys before they get down to business." Don and Ed drove up. They came over and I told them what the women were wearing. We watched as several men arrived and went inside. We had no idea if it was Eric and Richard. I didn't want to go inside too early and spoil the surprise. Ed said he would go and see if the women were sitting alone or not. Both he and Don wore baseball caps. I hoped Kristen wouldn't recognize them too soon. He called from the inside and said that he had barely had time to get a beer when two guys sat down with the women. They kissed women as if they were going to make love right there in the bar. He told us where they were sitting. He quickly finished his beer and went outside to help Don identify the guys' cars. He stayed close by in case we needed help. When we got inside, Jason and I took out our phones and started filming what was happening. Without saying anything, we walked up to the four of them and filmed for a few seconds how they clung to each other, interlacing their arms. Sandra raised her head and screamed when she saw us. "Hi, girls," I said much louder than I needed to. Kristen's expression was priceless. She started babbling something. "Go on, you cheater," I announced loudly. There was silence in the bar. "Don't pay any attention to me, and don't bother coming home. I'm going to pick up your shit and take it out on the lawn tonight. You can drag him to that other cheater's house." With my free hand, I pointed at Sandra. "And you guys can keep these married cheaters after you have fun today. I don't need that fool anymore. I'm sure Sandra's husband won't want her either when he finds out about it." One of them started to get to his feet. "Nebud durakom pridurok. Jesleka povernulsia e pokazal emu rukoyatku swojego, gloka nadliniaj pojasa. Daje vi priglushanom osvesheni on zametno poblednel. Majest Jasonom povernulis I vishli. Ia podumal. Skolko vremeni projdet. Prejdechem ja poluchu svoj pervi telefoni zvonok ili subščeni. 10 minut." Da, czto taj kochesh, parenza konchil igrat stvoje grudiu. Ekidnos brosil ia. Ja vyklučil gromkuju sviaz, czto bi jason polučil udovolstvia. Čert vozmi. Skazala Kristen. Eto ne to, chem kajetsia. Eti parni prikali vigorod podelam. Odin is nik, stari drug sandri. I nužen bil kto tavi kachestve prikritia, ja ne mog poverit, čto ona skazala mene eto ne to kem kajetsia. Naverno, eto vise, čto oni smogli pridumat za 10 minut. Ja rasmajalsia. Da, odna ruka parnia bila tak daleko vokrug tvoje še. Čto on mog dotjanutsia do tvoje grudi. Drugaya ego ruka bila pod stolom. Interesno, bila liona I u tebia pod platom. Po video ne mogu skazat. No eto ne imit značenia. Ti legala, ti obmanivala. My zakončili. Je uslišal džeri, pozaluista. Kogda nazal na ikonku. Čto bi završit zvonok. Ti zaneš. Čto segodnia večerom ja idu s toboj domoj. Skazal Jason. Ja udivleno posmotrel na nego. Ne sporo betom. Poslední neskolko časov ti rabotal na adrenalini. Podpitivem ji gnievom. Ti vel sebie v polne normalno. Kotia I nemnogo nervno. Skoro ti poterpiš krach. I eto tebia zadanet. Ja budu riadom. Čto bi tajne nadalal gluposte I ne razvalilsia na časti. Ja tiko skazalemu. Čto ceniu eto. On protianul mene svoj telefoni skazal. Čto bi ja zašel v jego kontakti I pozvonil ego žene. O kem ona dumala. Zakričala v trubku seju, žena Jasona. Ja vključil gromkuju sviaz. Ona izmeniaet, mine ničego ne ostavalos. Kak raskokotacija. Spasibo seju. Skazal ia. Ja rad, čto ti menia prikriveš. Ja cenju eto. Ja by stelala tu ze samo s Jasonom, esli bi on mene izmenil. Skazala seju. A esli by ja izmenila emu. A ja by znala, čto od nego možno ožidat togo ze ili daže kuže. Jason, ostancia segodnia stžeri I pomogi emu. Mozhetbit, vam, rebiata, stoit podumat o tom, čto bi vziat neskolko dne I poekat v rybni lager I napicia, kak tolko vi vozmete sebia v ruki. Ja ljubil svoju nevestku. Ladno snachala o glavnom. Whisky, tequila, rum ili pivo. Sprosil Jason, kogda my podekali k mojemu domu. Ja odvetil, čto pivo bezopasne. On prinas dve butilki I postavil ještě neskolko v kolodilnik oklaždacia. Nučto načnem pakovat I dermo. Sprosil on, ukmiliajas. Ja znal, čto vi konečnom I toge. Eto ne imit značenia. Ja skore visego. Nesmogu udržat I na ulice. Mine vyseravno bilo naplavat na dom. No eto bilo by zajavlenie. I ja planiroval stelat eto zajavlenie kak možno boli publiknim. My vziali korobku s musornými paketami I stali skladivat v nej vise I vešči. Načinaja s odeždy. My stali skladivat ich vo dvore. Nedaleko od fasada doma. Eto bilo stelano dlia togo. Čto by menia ne obvinili v tom, čto ja razdali vešči. Tam ge mezili, esli ti vystavlial vešči na obočinu. Štitalos, či to ich možno zabrat. Často vypererivak meždu vyvozom musora. Na obočine možno bilo najti bytovuju techniku. Starý televizor ili čto to ešte. Divani I stulia stavili studa pri obnovlení kvartíry. Bilo priniato ščitat. Čto eti vešči odajúcia. Ljuboj, kto kotel? Mog ich vziat. Eto izbavlialo od neobchodimosti ekata na svalku I davalo возможnost нуждающимся. Ja položil vešči Kristen riadom s domom. Ja skazal čto verse budet na ulice. I nadejался, čto budu pod Strakoven. Через час, visia odežda I ličnie vešči Kristen lešhali na lužajke. Ja smenil kombinaciu na svojem oružajnom sejfe sokranil visiu dokumentaciu, kotoruju kotel zaščitit. Ja zašel v svoj domašný office. Čto by ubedicia? Čto tam net ničego? Čto nelzia bilo by zamenit? Ja znal, čto mi ne bude trudno privleč Kristen kod vedstvenosti za uščerb. Esli ona polučiv dom, vibrosit čto dovažnoj. Ona podakala v meste Sandroj. Are you seriously going to throw my stuff out of the house? Stop it, she screamed. I nodded. It was already about 9 o'clock. We started our adventure early. I reached for the door and grabbed the air horn I had from fishing and boating supplies. I started honking. After several loud beeps, neighbors appeared from nearby houses. They immediately realized that something unusual was going on. A few people were holding mobile phones in case the situation got really interesting, but everyone was standing and watching. I went out into the open, almost onto the street. My wife Kristen and her friend Sandra were dating and making love to guys, making wild love, I announced in a loud and firm voice. I heard Kristen start crying and begging behind my back. I caught them both at a bar with their boyfriends tonight. If anyone needs proof, I'll be happy to show them the video. I want this cheater out of my house. She can go live with her friend. I'll leave in the next few days and she can come back. We're finished. I waved my hand cordially. How could you do that? Kristen asked, not believing that I had the audacity to make such a public statement. Sandra understood perfectly well what this meant for herself. She knew that if I hadn't done it yet, I would call her husband soon. She was sitting on the lawn and crying. She had only been married to Bob for a couple of years, but they had a prenuptial agreement. Knowing her story, I took him aside and warned him to hedge his bets. Trust but check, I said. He took my advice. You son of a bitch. You don't have any evidence that we did anything, Sandra said, trying to sound confident. Well, did we sit in a bar with a couple of friends? It's a big deal. I pointed to the packages and said it was better to put them away, otherwise they might disappear. To be honest, I expected the police to show up soon, and indeed a patrol car drove up. While all this was happening, Jason was in my office and made sure that the contents of our phones, both his and mine, were uploaded to the cloud. I was busy explaining to the police how I caught my wife cheating. The question was, who would leave home today? One of the employees said that it was usually a man. I said I'd love to, but my wife's things are already packed. He grinned, knowing that I was filming him. Now I am not sure that my wife will not destroy my property. I have a home office where confidential data from my work is stored, so if you want me to leave instead of her, I want to be able to secure my things. A police sergeant was called. I repeated my position. With difficulty maintaining a straight face, he turned to Kristen. Ma'am, do you have somewhere to go tonight and where to leave your things for the night? She nodded tearfully. I thought the cops would laugh when I offered to help Kristen carry her stuff in trash bags down the street to Sandra's house. Half of the neighbors were watching the show now. Several people came to the rescue hoping to hear the whole story. Please, can we talk? Kristen asked plaintively. I replied that maybe in a day or two, and then maliciously loudly added, but only after I realized that all your boyfriend's fluid has drained out of you. I don't want to smell him on you. You had an hour after I left you at the bar before you came home. This insult hurt her so much that she left crying. I saw several neighbors laughing. Every word I say will be repeated and most likely supplemented as it spreads. With all the activity in my house, Eric and Richard thought they got away with it. It wasn't like that. Ed and Don watched them as they followed Jason and me outside and watched us drive away. Turning to Kristen and Sandra, they kissed them goodbye, but did not caress them, as they were probably being watched by other patrons of the bar. Both men moved to their cars and watched Kristen and Sandra get into Sandra's car. Thanks to the delay, Ed and Don had enough time to memorize not only the license plates, but also the make and model of the cars. They even filmed men kissing women goodbye. Then they proceeded to the houses, presumably their own. Ed and Don called Jason to see how we were doing. He told them to come to our house. We sat and laughed at what we had learned. Ed was watching me closely. Finally, I looked at him and asked, What? Dude, you're going to lose your mind. I'll stay close to make sure you don't kill anyone, he offered. I was with Don when he was going through this. My brother Jason said he said the same thing. What the hell are you talking about? I asked, starting to get seriously angry. Dude, I was where you are now. Just like Ed said, Don said quietly. I spent a few days crying in my beer, thinking about what I'd lost and feeling sorry for myself before I realized how angry I was. I wasn't sure who I was more angry at, myself for being stupid or my wife and her lover for cheating. Definitely on them. I barely restrained the urge to kill this fool and my wife, with whom she was making love. Don laughed at the memory. It took a few days, but I started to feel bad because I hadn't been paying attention for so long and didn't see the signs. I felt like an idiot. And what did you do? I asked. I suspected there was a lot more to this story than they admitted. Nothing. I just divorced that fool, Don said with a half smile. Well, I let the guy's wife know. Ed started to giggle. I looked at him. Now I knew there was more to this story. That's our official story, Ed said. Don lied, and I swore it. I'm sorry, Don, but Jerry needs to hear this. Don smiled and told him to keep going. We started a small campaign against this fool on the side. The guy, of course, knew that Crystal was married. I'm sorry, Don, we try not to use her name. Her new name is Cheating Fool, that's what we call her, he offered as an explanation. A day later, the guy got his ass kicked. He never saw who did it. He did not need medical help, just a handful of ice to relieve the swelling of the scrotum. In general, even after his wife found out that he was cheating on her and divorced him, taking him to the cleaners, the guy continued to have all sorts of troubles. His garden house, where he kept his inventory, caught fire. He often had punctured tires. He couldn't even go to the bar without someone hitting him, and when he fell, he got a few kicks in the balls. He was very unlucky. His boss knew he was a fraud and didn't fire him, but said he was on probation. When he tried to change jobs, this story followed him. I mean, it's just bad luck, you know, Ed said. So what happened to him? I asked. Oh, he moved to Georgia. I was trying to turn over a new leaf, Don said. It's funny, but after a month or so, his new boss found out why he left Louisiana. It seems they don't like it when guys make love to their colleagues any more than we do. He's had a tough couple of years. Have you really been messing with him that long? I asked. None of the men have ever told me about it. It looks like you had to put in a lot of effort to get rid of him. Hey, everyone should have their own hobby, Don laughed. I mean, I'm still fishing and hunting, but I'm not married, so I have a lot of free time at night. The clock keeps asking me to do something. Unless, of course, there's a good movie going on. Sure, Ed suggested. Tell him about this bitch. Oh yes, it seems like she's having a hard time finding a steady boyfriend. I mean, more than 2 dates, Don said. Guys may like a wild cheater in the bedroom, but few people like to hear their mothers outraged after receiving a video of his new girlfriend and her potential daughter-in-law making love to a couple of guys. Or how she takes him in all 3 holes, knowing that at that time she was married and the guy was not her husband. And all her colleagues have copies of her antics. Don laughed. Especially the wives of her male colleagues. They are understandably concerned. I started laughing. Now I regret that I didn't figure it out, I said, wiping away tears from a strong laugh. I'm missing out on this fun. Don shrugged his shoulders. It was fun, but I think it's time to move on. Although this fool will always be guessing. It takes a lot of effort. Of course, she knows who is behind her problems. A few months ago, she asked me what she could do to get me to back off. I was very careful not to give myself away and not let her frame me. She would have sued me to death. That's why I never confessed to you guys. Only Ed knew. We laughed. I started to wonder what I could do. Let's think about it before we act, Ed suggested. I mean, it's only been 7 hours or so since you found out about all this. The others agreed. Jason said that his wife Sue said that we need to find time and go to our fishing camp and have a drink. The camp technically belonged to our father, but Jason and I used it whenever we wanted. Oh, hell yes, declared Ed. I know that my wife will agree with this, especially if I bring a bunch of fish. Yeah, plus she might get a chance to join Kristen and her friend while we're out in the swamp. Don laughed, teasing his friend. Her, not with our prenuptial agreement. Ed grinned back. She'll have to divorce me first to get something. Now I feel embarrassed that I didn't protect myself, I confessed. I knew that Kristen's 2 closest friends were cheaters and round heels. I should have thought about it. All 3 of them told me that we all make mistakes. I'll know better next time. Finally, we went to bed. I lay there for a while and wondered if I could fall asleep. Then I realized that talking to friends helped me more than a group of consultants. I felt better. I rolled over on my back and closed my eyes. I fell asleep. I woke up refreshed. I didn't even have a hangover. Kristen wanted to talk the next day. I asked her why. She came up to me in the middle of the morning. I told her that I would only talk to her in the yard and not behind a closed door. I had a phone in my pocket that was recording. She was trying to explain how my coming to the bar kept her from doing stupid things. How many times have you made love to them or to their other friend, Brian? I asked. She looked at me with wide eyes. She realized that I knew a lot more about her activities than what I saw in the bar last night. She stammered for a few seconds but didn't answer. I have good news and bad news, I offered with a smile. She looked at me hopefully. The good news is that I paid off my credit card before I canceled it. I also paid the utility bills, so they're fine for the next month. Plus, I've paid off all our loans. We are debt-free. The bad news is we have about $700 left between the savings and the check. I took off my half, I said. She looked at me in horror. I shrugged my shoulders. Some of these bills were long-term bills. We paid them off like bills for a car. Both cars were registered in our names. If she couldn't or wouldn't make payments, I knew the banks would come after me to pay them off. Well, you still have a few options, I said. You and Sandra can move in with your lovers or Tammy. I'm pretty sure Bob is going to kick her out as part of their prenuptial agreement, and I intend to put our house up for sale immediately. The real estate agent is the second call I plan to make on Monday. The first one is for a lawyer. Can't we talk about this? Kristen said plaintively. What is there to talk about? I asked. I tried my best to stay calm. My heart was breaking, but my anger was getting the better of me. You're the one who decided to mess around. Of course, you knew what would happen when I found out. Of course, you never thought that I would do this. But as I said before, you have a choice. I'm sure your guys will organize you girls so that they have free access to some hot stuff. Kristen looked at me like she'd swallowed a baseball. Of course, it can get complicated if one of them is married, I added. I haven't received a report on their personal life yet. I'm waiting for him to inform their wives if they have any. They're married. They have children, Kristen gasped. You can't ruin their lives. And why is this a problem? I asked, trying to make my voice sound as reasonable as possible. They didn't care about their marriages or mine. Therefore, as far as I understand, all the dirty laundry falls out on the floor and everyone sees it for what it is. Every shit stain. Now, if you don't have anything useful, why don't you go back to Sandra's house? She started to walk away and then turned around. Did you call Bob? What is it? She asked. I realized that this was one of the questions Sandra wanted to know when Kristen returned. I smiled and nodded. Of course I told Bob. I did it last night before I got drunk. I brought him up to date and passed on Don's suggestions about dealing with finances first. Bob didn't have as much debt as I did, but he paid off and canceled his credit cards and took 75% of the available cash, as per the prenuptial agreement. He, like me, knew that Sandra would not be able to return the money as soon as she withdrew it from the account. Her miserable part-time job barely allowed her to drink wine and occasionally go to lunch. Bob called me back in the morning to find out what I had done and to tell me that he would be back in town late in the morning. I was busy transferring money and was half drunk when we talked last night. His anger and resentment were palpable. He really loved Sandra. Last year, he privately told me that he felt guilty about asking for a prenuptial agreement, but he concluded it anyway when I insisted. Last night, he reminded me of that conversation and said he was glad now that he had listened to me. I told him to get home safely and we'll figure it out together. I watched Kristen walk toward Sandra's house. She looked depressed. Her shoulders slumped as she shuffled forward. Of course, these women could come out victorious and regain their lives. They were beautiful. It was only necessary to become professionals, not amateur cheaters. An adult movie was a great option if you didn't go into the category of call girls. They could earn a decent, if not very good, living. I wished I had told Kristen about it a few minutes ago. I'll have to remember this phrase for the future. I gave the middle finger to the retreating figure, one parting shot. I've been thinking about what Don said last night, that everyone needs to have a hobby, and his hobby was to make fun of his ex and her boyfriend. I didn't have the information to do anything with any of these three guys, but I knew where Kristen was vulnerable. Was it cruel, sadistically, even unjustifiably? Yes, but I did it anyway. I took out my mobile phone. Hi, Miss Sullivan. I greeted the woman who answered. Since when do you call me Miss Sullivan? What is it? She asked. No, since you started dating Kristen, I've always been a mom. Well, that's the problem, I said. I love you. You've always been there for me. But everything has changed. I want you to know that Kristen and I are getting divorced. To say that an almost 50-year-old woman was shocked would be an understatement. What? She exclaimed. A week ago, you told me that you decided to have a baby. Well, that was before I found out that Kristen was cheating on me, I said. She and her friends Sandra and Tammy dated three guys at every opportunity. As I heard, it was a festival without limits. Kristen goes there whenever I'm at my fishing camp. She refuses to go there with me and instead entertains one of these guys. Miss Sullivan asked if I was sure. I have an audio recording, and last night I followed her to the bar. Her behavior at the bar definitely didn't pass the husband test. In fact, her behavior would be unacceptable in most bars in the city, I said. I have a video recording. That stupid fool, Miss Sullivan grumbled. I thought she'd put her wild ways behind her when she married you. She said it was true. She started crying. Please stay close, Jerry. It's time for me to go. She hung up the phone. I was ashamed that I had hurt this lovely woman, But at the same time, I didn't want Kristen to tell the story of our family and make me look like a bad guy. 30 minutes later, an angry Kristen called me. "How dare you, you son of a bitch!" she screamed. "What?" I asked innocently. "You know what? How could you tell my mom that I was fooling around?" she screamed. "Isn't that true?" I asked. She called me a few more names and hung up. Bob appeared. He didn't even bother to stop by his house. He wanted to talk to me first. After we talked and he had copies of my audio file and a video recording of Sandra pressing her lips to a man whose hands seemed to be where they shouldn't be, we went to his house. "I'm here to pick up my things, or at least clothes for a few days," he announced. Sandra looked from Bob to me and back again. He took out his mobile phone. "If anything is damaged, destroyed, or otherwise tampered with, I will initiate a criminal case against you. Let this serve as a notification," he warned. He walked around the house and shot videos. I hadn't thought of that. I took out my mobile phone. "Kristen, I go home and take a video of our apartment. If something is subsequently destroyed or stolen, I will open a criminal case against you, including if you let your lover into the house and he causes damage. I had no idea if it was legal, but the result was excellent." Kristen sat and sobbed. I doubt she would have thought of destroying anything on her own, but I wasn't going to take any chances. 24 hours ago, I could not have imagined that she would cheat on me. Bob grabbed the clothes he had for a few days and we carried them to my house. "You know, I really thought Sandra had changed. She told me several times that she was a cheater. Well, according to her description, pretty wild. But now it's all behind her. She wanted to be my loving wife and the mother of my children. I feel like such a fool. A few months ago, she even stopped taking pills. Oh, damn it. I hope she's not pregnant. Of course, I would have done a DNA test, but even if I were a father, I would still be inundated with alimony. I told him not to worry about it until it happens. Don, Ed, and Jason came with a couple of cases of beer. "So everything is treated with beer, right?" I asked. "No, it just makes everything a little more bearable," Don replied. I told them what I had done to Kristen. Don laughed and congratulated me. With my help, Bob did something similar, covering his ass. His debt was less, but now it was gone, and he transferred his part to another account. Jason laughed, saying that with the money now in his checking account, he could go on a long trip and spend a few weeks in Cabo. Bob and I needed an account to put money in. I didn't have many, but he did. We couldn't open an account last night, so we transferred the money to Jason's account. My brother ran the license plates. Officially, of course, he can't say anything. But I have names and addresses, Don said. I told them that Kristen had said that the guys were married and had children. "Well, before I drink too much, I want to see what I can find out about wives," I said. "Bob, I'm in the mood for a little revenge on scorched earth. What about you?" He grinned back and took out his laptop. Finding Eric and Richard turned out to be easier than I expected. Both had Facebook profiles with photos of their wives and children. Their wives were on the contact lists. It turned out to be easier than ever to find out the mobile phone number of each woman. Each man had several contacts named Brian, and the pair were in common. We didn't want to notify the wife of an innocent man. When I called, I introduced myself to Richard's wife. I got down to business quickly. I explained the whole situation. To say that the woman was angry would be an understatement. He's cheated before. It was convenient for her to let him go on dates with two friends because she believed that this would keep him from cheating, at least in these moments. Let me guess. Brian is one of these friends, but he was unavailable last night. Do you know his wife? She knew. I asked if she wanted to meet, and I would give her a copy of the audio file I had, as well as the video I shot last night. She definitely wanted to meet as soon as possible. I suggested that she call Eric's wife, and she said she would do it, as well as Brian's wife, and would call me back to make an appointment. 15 minutes later, she called me. I was amazed at the speed. She told me she wasn't going to waste any time. I made copies of the recordings for both women. We met at a local cafe. Bob and I were sitting and standing when 3 women in casual clothes came inside. The women looked to be about 30 years old. They were several years older than us. They were minimally made up, but each of them was very beautiful. I offered to buy them coffee, and they agreed. I've included the original recordings for them. "So this has been going on for a while," Richard's wife Kathleen said. I told them that I had no idea how the men met our wives. They hadn't seen Sandra or Christina before. I opened Tammy's picture. Brian's wife recognized her. "She works with Brian, some kind of Tamara or something like that," I've seen her at company events. I guess that's how it all started. She and Brian had an affair that turned into full-fledged orgies with other women. Well, not orgies, I corrected. It seems that guys refuse to share a partner for the night, but otherwise they change. And as I've heard, it's all very uninhibited. Any action is acceptable. Eric's wife replied, "Yes, the fact that Eric took out and took your wife does not surprise me." I assured her that I was as surprised by this part of the conversation as she was. I told him that I was going to file for divorce as soon as possible and what Bob and I had done with our finances. I saw their gears move. "Well, I'm going to do some shopping before I go home," Richard's wife announced. "There is a dress in one boutique that I have my eye on. Maybe I'll find some dresses. A woman I know bought a few things and then returned them for cash. Maybe I'll dress up and ask Richard if I look as good as Kristen and Sandra last night when he walks through the door. Just before I tell him to get the hell out. He'll know something's up when Eric gets home and finds his stuff on the lawn this afternoon. I'm sure Eric will call him as soon as he arrives, even before he enters the house," Eric's wife said. I told her that I had packed Kristen's clothes. I might pack it just to help take it outside, but then I'll throw it all away. I'll just throw away his suits. I like your idea of a horn to alert the neighbors. You say you can buy them in the fishing department of any store? I nodded. Bob and I were laughing openly. We'd better get started. They're playing golf this afternoon and they'll be home around 6. I wonder how many of those golf trips were spent with these women, who instead played with their balls and clubs. Another round of laughter. I was wondering how long this anger would last before the sobbing started. These women were tough, but I remembered what Don had said. That's what I said. We have already discussed this among ourselves, after I caught Richard the first time. We even insisted that we all sign a prenuptial agreement. Not too unilateral, but containing serious sanctions, Kathleen said. We had a kind of hypothetical plan to support each other, and how we would crucify our husbands for helping or covering up if one of the other guys had an affair. Now we know that they are all involved in this. Our children are already in their teens. They'll find out about it today. They're old enough now. The other women nodded. We said goodbye after exchanging phone numbers. It looks like these 3 bastards decided that sharing 3 cheaters would be easy to hide. I've never heard where they met. I guess it's mostly Tammy's. Thank God your car needed repairs and you weren't sitting around waiting. Back at my house, we spent the rest of the day drinking beer. We had to order food for dinner, as none of us could drive. Sandra called Bob. He turned on the speakerphone. Why did you need to involve Tammy and Brian? They weren't even there last night, she wailed. All 3 of their wives are threatening divorce, and Brian's wife says she's going to report this to Brian's boss. Tammy called us all upset because she could be fired at the same time. I couldn't help myself. I started giggling. Let me ask you something, Bob said. We were betting that you girls met most often at Tammy's house for your little fests. Motel rooms were going to become quite expensive and quite limited in space. Sandra muttered something, but did not confirm or deny it. Well, Tammy's in deep trouble anyway. Very sorry. She deserved what she got. The actions next week went as we expected. Bob and I hired the same lawyer. We used the services of the person who drafted his marriage contract. Kristen and Sandra were served at work in the middle of the week. Both houses were put up for sale. We put the houses up for sale with the help of the same agent. We explained the circumstances and said that although we know we don't have a lot of capital, we're going to negotiate a sale so we don't have a lot of pocket money. I have often heard that any undertaking consists of 90% preparation and 10% execution. Divorce is the same thing. Once we got everything in motion, our part of the job was almost done. Then the lawyers decided everything. I found a small apartment. It was not difficult to divide the furniture and other common property. Most of the items went to separate warehouses. We sold the rest for cash at a real estate company. The only place where I almost made a mistake was in the courtroom. I started making comments that girls could become good professionals. If not as active cheaters, then as cheaters on the internet. The kick the lawyer gave me under the table caused a lump to grow on my shin. Stupid, she said, frowning at first, and then softening to a smile. There are things that cannot be said in court. Kristen's lawyer has already mentioned that you told all her colleagues, friends, and relatives about her adventures. You don't want this to be accompanied by comments that she's prostituting herself to support herself, do you? Maybe it's a bit far-fetched, but we don't want you to be accused of trying to force your ex-wife into prostitution by your actions. It might not play out very well, and you'll have to pay her alimony. Just keep your comments to yourself. I nodded. 7 years later, Sandra, Kristen, and Tammy became roommates again. After losing her job, Tammy couldn't pay the rent on her own. It seemed to be difficult for her to find another job as good as the one she had lost. Her new boss would somehow hear the story that she and her roommates were cheating. Each of Kristen's co-workers knew what she had done to destroy her marriage as well. Her work seems to have stalled, but I'm willing to bet that men were lining up to taste her ass, despite the watchful eyes of their wives. Sandra's job at the mall wasn't enough to support her without help. Bob and I followed the girls' relationships for about a year after our divorce. We took a page from Don's book about hobbies and let any man that one of them had dated more than twice know everything about them. In the end, we got tired of it. Brian was fired at the same time as Tammy. I heard that he had some good job prospects. He needed her, of course. His minimum child support and alimony were set in accordance with his post-marriage agreement. Although I sympathized with his family, his new boss and colleagues quickly found out the details of why he lost his previous position. He was not a happy tourist. He was treated like an outcast. Richard and Eric weren't doing much better, although they still had jobs. I never found out if they went to Tammy's for a hookup, but I wouldn't be surprised. The epilogue, Bob and I were happy that we were still single. I was only 29, and I was in no hurry to get married again. However, I had several prospects. One of the best was the younger sister of one of Jason's co-workers. I met her at a barbecue party at Jason's house. I knew it was a setup. We met several times, and as it seemed to me, were compatible in and out of bed. She took up quite a lot of my free time, and I weakened my role in the campaign against the 6 cheaters. We both hypothetically agreed to a prenuptial agreement if we ever had serious intentions about marriage. She didn't think it was necessary because she said one afternoon at a fishing camp, if my husband ever cheated on me, I would feed his ass to alligators, after I use his eggs as bait for fish.